Okay, some of these documents, obviously you won't be able to see if you're sitting further back in the audience, but what I'll do is talk through them for you. This is one of the earliest, if not the earliest, FBI documents concerning UFOs, and it concerns an approach made by the military to the FBI with regard to them getting involved in carrying out investigations. And it's captioned at the top, Flying Discs, dated the 24th of July 1947. Brigadier General George F. Callaghan of the Army Air Corps Intelligence has requested that the Bureau cooperate with the Army Air Corps in connection with the above captioned matter, namely flying discs. General Callaghan indicated he desired Mr. Hoover of complete cooperation in this matter and stated he would issue instructions to the field directing that all cooperation be furnished to the FBI and that all discs recovered be made available for the examination by the FBI agents. And that's an interesting phrase about discs recovered. That's led to various controversies concerning the so-called Roswell crash, whether the military did recover a UFO, what the FBI knew about it, and so on. General Callaghan inquired the method by which the Bureau would make the information obtained from the Bureau's inquiries known to the Air Corps. And it continues in this vein, explaining how the FBI and the military would liaise on the UFO subjects. But it's interesting that in the same way that I suppose UFO researchers today have various opinions and ideas as to what lies behind the UFO mystery, some feel it's an ET presence, others go with the secret weapon theory, whilst others, I suppose, support the idea that it's all down to some form of natural phenomenon or maybe even mass hysteria. And it's interesting that the FBI's own files reflect that the agents who were looking into this subject back in 1947 had, if you like, as many varying opinions as we hold today. For example, if we go on to the next slide, please, Matt. And the next, sorry, no, you can leave that one on. This is another report from August 47, which states, certainly the Bureau has no way to determine what experiments the Army and Navy are conducting and whether such might be arising out of experiments. Certainly the Bureau has no way to determine what experiments the Army and Navy are conducting and whether such might be arising out of experiments that the Russians have progressed in certain areas and whether such might be the results of other experiments by the Russian army. So basically what they're saying is that when the FBI began to look at the subject and agreed to liaise with the military, the FBI were given a stash of military-originated UFO reports. They looked at them, carried out various intelligence checks, and came to the conclusion that yes, something really was flying around the US, but was it a domestic military project? Were these alien spacecraft, or were they somehow connected with the work of the Russians, and the Russians were, if you like, testing our defences and flying advanced aircraft over US airspace? And again, this is something that is reflected in a lot of FBI documents throughout the summer of 1947. This one that's up at the moment, again captioned Flying Discs, refers to a special agent of the liaison section of the FBI who, quote, while discussing the above captioned phenomena with a Lieutenant Colonel of Air Force Intelligence, he expressed the possibility that flying discs were, in fact, a very highly classified experiment of the Army or the Navy, Mr. Deleted was very much surprised when the Colonel not only agreed that this was a possibility, but confidentially stated it was his personal opinion that such was a probability. The Colonel indicated confidentially that a Mr. Blank, who is a scientist attached to the Air Force Intelligence, was of the same opinion. The Colonel stated that he based his assumption on the following. He pointed out that when flying objects were reported seen over Sweden, the high brass of the War Department exerted tremendous pressure on the Air Force's intelligence to conduct research and collect information in an effort to identify these sightings. The Colonel stated that in contrast to this, we have reported sightings of unknown objects over the United States, and the high brass appears to be totally unconcerned. He indicated this led him to believe that they knew enough about these objects to express no concern. The Colonel pointed out further that the objects in question have been seen by many individuals who are what he termed trained observers, such as airline pilots. He indicated also that several of the individuals are reliable members of the community. It is his conclusion that these individuals saw something. He stated the above has led him to come to the conclusion that there were objects seen which somebody in the government knows all about. So again, it appears to be the case that the FBI, through their inquiries, had come to the conclusion that something was going on, that these things were being seen by qualified sources such as military pilots and airline pilots, but they felt that because they were getting the feedback that the government wasn't overly concerned by this, that this had to be some form of domestic secret weapon. Well, again, we know through some of the documents which have been declassified now through the Freedom of Information Act that the government was actually quite highly concerned, or very highly concerned, about the subject. But it appears to be the case that this didn't leak down to the FBI. All that leaked down to the FBI was that, yes, things are being seen and the government's taking an interest. The overriding paranoia and fear, if you like, that was prevalent throughout much of the military certainly didn't reach the eyes and the ears of the FBI. And if we can just go on to the next slide, Matt. That's Donald Kehoe, who Michael also mentioned earlier. Donald Kehoe was one of the first champions, if you like, of the so-called ETH, the extraterrestrial hypothesis. And he made inquiries with various insider sources at the Pentagon in 1948 and asked pointed questions. Are we responsible for the flying saucers? Are they a secret weapon that we're building, or possibly the Russians? And he got a fairly pointed reply back from a high-ranking source in the Pentagon who said, "Good God, man, if these really were a secret weapon, do you really think that we'll be ordering our pilots to open fire on them?" And of course, you know, the obvious answer is no. You certainly don't fly state-of-the-art experimental advanced aircraft in your own airspace and then order your military pilots to shoot them down. So, you know, what is the answer? Were some of these UFOs seen in the late 40s secret weapons? Yes, they probably were. But it also appears to be the case that we've got something else going on as well, something that was able to silently, stealthily invade our airspace, violate our, if you like, our air defences, and escape without punishments. So, you know, we seem to have several things going on here. And again, this is reflected in the FBI's investigations, that in a number of cases they suggested that, well, maybe this was something involving the military. In other cases, no, all avenues were looked into and the military and the combined FBI investigations were left baffled. So that's, if you like, are some of the early investigations which the FBI carried out in 1947. If we can go on to the next slide, please, Matt. Right, if we now turn to the late 1940s and early 1950s, and something called Project Twinkle, which is a bit of a funny name for a project, but Project Twinkle was an operation designed to investigate sightings of strange green fireballs and strange balls of green light, which were seen in the vicinity of military and atomic energy installations, predominantly in New Mexico, between 1948 and 1951. And again, various theories have been put forward as to what these things might have been. They genuinely could have been some form of natural phenomenon. The problem was that they were focused so restrictively, if you like, in the New Mexico area, and specifically around these atomic energy installations. They weren't flying left, right and centre around, shall we say, New York or Washington or Alaska. It was simply New Mexico and this hard core of atomic energy installations. So the FBI has investigative jurisdiction in two particular areas, sabotage and espionage, and any potential crimes, which this was initially looked on as, in the vicinity of atomic energy installations, is an area in which the FBI can become involved. And although Project Twinkle was largely a US Air Force operation, because of their jurisdiction, the FBI, under the control of J. Edgar Hoover, decided to have a look in and see what was going on. Hoover certainly had his finger in a lot of pies and liked to keep tabs on pretty much everything that was going on in both governments and the military. And again, thanks to, I suppose, his intrusions and the Freedom of Information Act, we've now got a large body of evidence on Project Twinkle from the files of the FBI. And this is one particular report dated January the 31st, 1949. If you put the next page up now, Matt, if you like, which states, during the past 2 months, various sightings of unexplained phenomena have been reported in the vicinity of atomic energy installations at Los Alamos, New Mexico, where these phenomena now appear to be concentrated. During December 48, on the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 11th, 13th, 14th, 20th, and 25th, sightings of unexplained phenomena were made near Los Alamos by special agents of the Office of Special Investigations, airline pilots, military pilots, Los Alamos security inspectors, and private citizens. So again, you know, that's something that goes out, shall we say, to the skeptics, that as far back as 49, the quality of the reports that the FBI and the Air Force were receiving on Project Twinkle with regard to these particular sightings, the predominant sources, shall we say, were all highly credible. Nighttime sightings have taken the form of lights, usually described as brilliant green, similar to a green traffic signal or green neon light. Recent observations have indicated that the unidentified phenomena travel at a rate of speed estimated at a minimum of 3 miles per second and a maximum of 12 miles per second, or a mean calculated speed of 7.5 miles a second, or 27,000 miles an hour. Now, just bear that in mind. This document's dated 1949, and it's referring to objects travelling at a speed of 27,000 miles an hour and taking a particular interest in our atomic energy installations. Now, I'm quite certain that if, for example, in 1949, the Soviet Union had the capability to fly objects at 27,000 miles an hour from Russia to the US, then the Cold War would have turned, shall we say, from a cold one into a hot, very hot one very, very quickly. So, again, one of the theories put forward was possibly that this was the work of the Russians, but again, because of the sheer speed of these objects, the manoeuvrability, etc., that particular theory was then ruled out. This particular document summarises some of the characteristics of the green fireballs reported to the FBI. Dr. Lincoln LaPaz of the University of New Mexico discussed one sighting which he himself had made, which was termed the Starvation Peak Incident, and described the following characteristics which indicated that the phenomenon could not be classified as a normal meteorite fall. There was an initial bright light and constant intensity during the duration of the phenomenon. Yellow-green colour, essentially horizontal path, trajectory traversed at constant angular velocity, duration about 2 seconds, no accompanying noise. It was brought out that since December 5, 1948, there have been more than 10 incidents analogous to the green fireball above described, and some 20 others with minor deviations from the above. We go on to the next one, Matt. Oh, that's that particular document. You can keep going. In fact, miss the next one and go straight on to the one after that. That's one of the green fireballs taken, or a drawing of one of the green fireballs that was seen by Dr. LaPaz himself. And it's faded in time, but the actual body of the fireball in the original picture is quite like a luminous green colour. And this was one of the sightings that he had himself, which convinced him that these weren't straightforward meteorites or anything of that ilk, shall we say. The next one, please, mate. Okay, just to give you an indication of the variations of the types of reports of UFOs that the FBI receive, this is the first page of a radar report, a three-page radar report from September 1951, in which a vast UFO was tracked over the coastline by military radar operators, and the FBI got wind of this particular incident because they were still liaising with the Air Force at the time, and this three-page report was forwarded to the FBI for interest on their part. And you can go through to the next page if you like, Matt. I'll just quote a bit from this. The target appeared to approximately follow the coastline, changing its range only slightly, but changing its azimuth rapidly. The radar set was switched to full aided azimuth tracking, which normally is fast enough to track jet aircraft, but in this case was too slow to be resorted to. This target also presented an unusually strong return for aircraft, being comparable in strength to that usually received from a coastal ship. The operator initially identified the target as a ship and then realised it could not be a ship after he observed its extreme speed. And that's something that we get in a lot of the radar reports from the 50s, where the operators, for example, have reported objects the size, if you like, of seagoing ships. There are several at the Public Record Office at Kew from the British Royal Air Force which fit that category. And again, this is a perfect example of one from the other side of the world in the States. And what's interesting is that in this particular case, the FBI was informed that two independent radar sets at different military bases had picked up the target. Both sets found it impossible to track the target in range due to its speed, and the operators had to resort to manual range tracking in order to hold the target. The target was approximately over New Jersey, as indicated by his 10,000 range, 6,000 feet altitude, and due north azimuth. The target remained practically stationary on the scope and appeared to be hovering. Now again, today we've got aircraft such as the Harrier, which can operate in hover mode, but certainly in 1951, we weren't flying things the size of seagoing liners which could hover at X thousand of number of feet above mainland USA. The target was observed to be changing in elevation at an extremely rapid rate, but change in range was so slow the operator believed the target must have risen near vertically. So again, having hovered, it then shot off vertically into the sky. Target fixed its rise in elevation at an elevation angle of approximately 1,500 miles, at which time it proceeded to move at an extremely rapid rate in range in a southerly direction. So that's just one report pulled at random from the FBI's files, where it's quite clear that several military bases have picked up an anomalous target flying over the USA at high speed, a large structured object, apparently under intelligent control, which made good its escape from the US Defence Department. If we can go on to the next one, Matt. And the next one. Okay. Many of you, I'm sure, will be aware of the fantastic wave of sightings that occurred in July 1952 over the US Capitol, over Washington, when UFOs were reported to have buzzed the White House, and they were seen by military pilots, by airline pilots, tracked on radar at Washington Airport, and by military radar. And this is an actual photograph of one of the radar operators plotting the movements of the object, or one of the objects, or a series of objects at the time. And what's interesting is that the FBI, or specifically J. Edgar Hoover, took note of these particular sightings and demanded an updated briefing from the US Air Force on its then current thinking and current findings on the UFO subject. This was in July 1952, and an official briefing was prepared for the FBI by the Air Force. And that particular report, that briefing, brings forward a number of interesting observations which the Air Force are actually playing down publicly. For example, the Air Force's public stance, if you like, was that there was no particular evidence in support of the notion that UFOs existed. There was no real evidence in terms of radar material, film footage, photographs, good quality military witnesses, good quality airline pilots, people like that. Reports were simply classed as hoaxes, or people were put in the nuts category. But if you read the Air Force's briefing given to the FBI, which was then summarised by the FBI in a 3-page memo for J. Edgar Hoover, we find a number of illuminating observations which we wouldn't have previously realised. Mr. N.W. Philcox, the Bureau's Air Force liaison representative, made arrangements through the office of Major General John Sanford, Director of Air Intelligence, regarding the present status of air intelligence research into the numerous reports regarding flying saucers and flying discs. Air Force research has indicated that the sightings of flying saucers goes back several centuries. Now, that in itself is interesting. Where's that information come from to support the idea that sightings go back several centuries? Certainly in the published literature of the, if you like, the ancient astronaut proponents, we hear things like that. But to see in an official FBI memorandum from 1952 that 47 years ago the Air Force had come to, if you like, similar if not identical conclusions is certainly eye-opening. Those sightings, Commander Boyd stated that these reported sightings of flying saucers are placed into 3 classifications by air intelligence. Those sightings which are reported by citizens who claim they have seen flying saucers from the ground. These sightings vary in description, colour and speed. Very little credence is given to these sightings, inasmuch as in most instances they are believed to be imaginative or some explainable object which actually cross through the sky, which is probably fair comment because most UFO sightings certainly can be explained, and I don't think, most responsible researchers would admit that, I wouldn't put a figure on it, 90-95%, but certainly it's a high figure that can be explained, and it's certainly just a small core percentage which appear to defy explanation. The second category, those sightings reported by commercial or military pilots. These sightings are considered more credible by the Air Force, inasmuch as commercial or military pilots are experienced in the air and are not expected to see objects which are entirely imaginative. In each of these instances, the individual who reports the sighting is thoroughly interviewed by a representative of air intelligence so that a complete description of the object can be obtained. And the third category, those sightings which are reported by pilots and for which there is additional corroboration, such as recording by radar or sighting from the ground. Commander Boyd advised that this latter classification constitutes 2 or 3% of the total number, but they are the most credible reports received and are difficult to explain. Some of these sightings are originally reported from the ground, then are observed by pilots in the air, and then are picked up by radar instruments. He stated that in these instances, there is no doubt that these individuals reported the sightings actually did see something in the sky. Now, one interesting little aside made at the bottom of the document, he advised that it is not entirely impossible that the objects cited may possibly be ships from another planet, such as Mars. So, again, we have this stance on the part of the Air Force that there was no evidence to support the notion that UFOs existed. Yet, in what was at the time a classified briefing for the FBI, they're actually confirming that UFOs have been picked up on radar by ground-based witnesses and also by military pilots in the air. And they're also expressing the notion that these things may be interplanetary ships, shall we say. Now, I suppose the idea of interplanetary ships coming from Mars in 1999 might seem a little bit quaint, but certainly nearly half a century ago, this was a serious proposition. And I suppose now the only difference is that rather than talking about interplanetary ships from Mars, we're talking about far greater distances and maybe some form of drive system, shall we say, that's currently unheard of. Just go on to the next one, please, Matt. That's just an example of the documents. And the next one. Keep going. Keep going. That's the first page of the briefing given to the FBI by the Air Force. And the next one. Okay. Things get a little bit controversial now and a little bit strange and odd. That's a guy named George Van Tassel. George Van Tassel was one of a number of people, quite a big figure, shall we say, within the UFO field in the 1950s. Along with George Adamski, I suppose George Van Tassel was one of the best known of the so-called contactees. The contactees were people who claimed, and still do claim to this day, to have been contacted by human-like aliens, and a number of them made a number of rather extraordinary and controversial claims, such as taking trips to the moon and making trips to Venus. And they gave their so-called alien contacts, or gave them various strange names and titles, things like Commander Zog, which the sort of names, which would sound completely at home in a cheap science fiction film, but don't do a great deal for your credibility. Well, George Van Tassel was one of the prime contactees, shall we say, and it's also fair to say that I'm not a fan of the contactee literature, nor am I a fan or a supporter of the claims of the contactees. I don't discount the possibility that some of them may well have had some form of genuine experience at some point, but when you begin to look into some of these claims, they become so absurd and so stupid that I personally don't have a great deal of time for them. But nevertheless, why this is all relevant is because both George Adamski and George Van Tassel, regardless of personal opinion on their claims, they were both monitored quite heavily by the FBI. George Adamski, for example, his FBI file is about 90 pages in length, and this guy, George Van Tassel, his is nearly 200 pages. And one of the reasons I think why the FBI monitored these guys so heavily is because if you look at their claims concerning alien contact, they're actually saying that in some ways their alien visitors, their alien friends, if you like, had some form of government which was almost veering on a communist government. Now, if you bear in mind that this was all in the mid-1950s, and at the time the FBI was run by J. Edgar Hoover, and you had the McCarthy witch hunts and things like that, anybody talking about radical forms of government, left-wing governments, or horror of horrors, communist governments, is going to be picked up on by the FBI and the security services. And I think that's largely what happened. But it's interesting that in this guy's case, George Van Tassel, the FBI didn't just monitor him and his publications. They sent agents out to conferences, to sit in the audience, to record notes about the sort of things he was speaking about. They went to his home to interview him, to get his comments on the UFO subject, on the nature of the aliens, government, things like this. And it sounds absurd that, FBI agents would actually go out and sit down with a guy and ask questions about the sort of governments that aliens have. But nevertheless, that is what happened. And if you got the next slide, Matt. That's a 1960 document concerning George Van Tassel. And it's the first page of, I think, a 4 or 5 page document where an FBI agent had prepared a report. He'd gone along to a conference that Van Tassel was speaking at, and the guy had sat in the audience. And I actually suspect that he didn't take notes. I think he may well have made a surreptitious tape recording of the conference and then prepared this report at a later date because it's so detailed. And it concerns Van Tassel's theories on economics, on the origin of religion, whether it was related to the activities of aliens. So this is all sort of pre-Eric von Daniken, pre-Sitchin and people like that. And again, I'll just quote you another document concerning George Van Tassel and his claims. Relative to spacemen and spacecraft, Van Tassel declared that a year ago last August, while sleeping out of doors with his wife in the Giant Rock area, and about 2 a.m, he was awakened by a man from space. This individual spoke English and was dressed in a grey one-piece suit, similar to a sweatsuit, in that it did not have any buttons, pockets, and noticeable seams. This person, according to Van Tassel, invited him to inspect a spacecraft or flying saucer which had landed on Giant Rock airstrip. So that's the sort of thing that George Van Tassel was saying, and the FBI laboriously and carefully chronicled it all in their files, again, which have now surfaced through the Freedom of Information Act. But again, you know, I have major problems with a lot of the claims of the contactees, simply because they sound so absurd. You know, the idea that Venus is populated by millions and millions of people, you know, designated titles like Commander Zog and Captain Zarkov and Princess Zog and things like that. It's to me, it's a little bit of a joke. So we just go on to the next one, please, Matt. And the next one. Well, that's, if you like, the most well-known, the most notorious of all the contactees, George Adamski. And it's a sort of name that I suppose provokes all sorts of controversies on one side of the fence and on the other side of the fence, depending on your point of view. A lot of people support George Adamski. I'm not one of them. A lot of people think his footage, his film footage and his photographs are genuine. Again, I'm not one of them. We can just go on to the next one, please, Matt. That's one of George's UFLs, his unidentified flying lampshades. Well, at least as far as I'm concerned, it is anyway. But again, George Adamski is the subject of an extensive FBI file, and it's one that, like George Van Tassel, addressed the claims that Adamski was making with regard to the nature of alien governments, their reasons for coming here, things like that. Next one, please, Matt. Okay, if we just move forward to 1956, it wasn't just from outside agencies and from the military that the FBI were receiving UFO reports. That is one page of a 3 or 4 page report from April 1956, where an actual FBI agent reported seeing a UFO on a lonely road in the early hours of one particular morning. And the FBI have sought to delete the names of the witness, or the name of the witness, but in one particular place on the report, the FBI censors missed the witness's name, and she's identified as a Miss Richards. And the document states, Miss Richards stated that about 5 a.m. on April 6, 1956, while it was still dark and while driving on Route 1 north of Henderson, North Carolina, she and her fiancé were startled by what appeared to be an oval-shaped, low-flying object coming directly towards their car at a great speed on the driver's side. Miss Richards stated the object, which was less than 25 feet from the ground, appeared to be spinning, was bright as though containing a series of lights in a zigzagging pattern, was light blue in colour, and was at least as wide as the highway, and this is the curious bit, and no more than from 2 to 4 feet in thickness. She stated the object did not change shape, it made no sound, and that she observed it for only a few seconds before it appeared to pass over the car, accelerate in speed and veer off out of sight behind them. Miss Richards advised when daylight came she noticed it was cloudy, and approximately 30 minutes after they had sighted the object, it began to rain. And she's described in the FBI's records as, quote, one of their best employees at the Washington, D.C. Headquarters. So again, this report, because it came from the FBI's own personnel, if you like, it was treated very seriously, and there was high-level liaison with the Air Force. And the next one, please, Matt. That's Lonnie Zamora, who Michael also mentioned earlier, the police officer who had a famous sighting in New Mexico at Socorro in April 1964. He'd seen this object, which he initially thought was an upturned car, and only to get close to it and realise it was some form of egg-shaped or oval-shaped object, and there were supposedly 2 small creatures milling around it. And this thing took off. He was petrified, and as Michael also said, the intelligence community, the US intelligence community, took a major interest in this case, the CIA, the US Air Force, and again the FBI. And the FBI's files on this particular incident are probably in the region of about 20 pages. But what's interesting is that they also refer to other sightings which occurred in the same time frame in broadly the same area of New Mexico. And these refer to very, very similar objects seen on the ground and in the air by witnesses, and they were investigated by the FBI, and reports were channeled through to the Air Force as part of a pre-arrangement that the Bureau had with Project Blue Book and Air Force Intelligence. If we go to the next one, Matt. That's one page, just one page example of the one of the FBI's reports on the Socorro sighting. While travelling in isolated area, approximately 1 mile south area of Socorro, noted in depression about 800 feet away, whitish objects which upon glancing at same appeared to be overturned automobile. 2 persons in apparent white coveralls were adjacent to object. That's important because it's often been stated that Zamora didn't report seeing at the time 2 people or 2 figures around the object, and that supposedly that came later. But if you look at the FBI's own reports, this one's dated only 1 day after that particular sighting, or less than 24 hours, and it refers in the official report to 2 small creatures walking around the craft. Next one, please, Matt. Oh, that's just the second page on the next one. And that's one of the photographs showing roughly the landing site where this object came down. Various stones were positioned around where this object had left depressions in the ground, and they were photographed by the officials, and some of the photographs have now surfaced via Project Blue Book at the National Archives. And the next one, Matt. Okay, this is a 1966 report, a 3-page report summarising a book written by a famous UFO author named Frank Edwards. And again, the FBI didn't or doesn't just concentrate its time, if you like, on looking at UFO reports supplied by the military or analysing the claims of people such as George Adamski and George Van Tassel. This is just one example from the FBI's records of where FBI agents had summarised and reviewed for official sources within the Bureau a published book on the UFO subject. And if you just carry on, Matt. This is a 3-page summary, you can keep going, of Frank Edwards' 1966 book, Flying Saucers Serious Business. And it details in quite a great extent, if you like, the various theories that are being put forward by Edwards and the sort of material that was published in his book. So, you know, bearing this in mind, it's entirely possible that if any of you ever decide to write a UFO book or a particularly controversial UFO article, you may well find it'll end up in the official archives of agencies such as the FBI, as this one certainly did. And the next one, Matt. Well, right, that's obviously, as you can see, a perfect example of the cattle mutilation. And the FBI became involved in the cattle mutilation controversy in the mid-70s, mainly because the FBI has jurisdiction to investigate crimes on Indian reservations. And from the mid to late 70s, a huge number of cattle mutilations, particularly in New Mexico, began to be reported from Indian reservations and on Indian land. And because of their jurisdiction, the FBI became involved to a limited extent. Initially, this largely revolved around analysing reports submitted by the New Mexico State Police Department. But it's interesting that if we look at some of these reports, we get to see that the cattle mutilations aren't, shall we say, a modern-day myth or anything like that. They're actually a very real and very grisly mystery. One particular report, which the FBI have declassified, have now released somewhere in the order of about 200 to 300 pages of material on cattle and animal mutilations, again, mainly in the New Mexico area, but certainly referring to sightings or events elsewhere as well. And for people who aren't, if you like, strictly aware of the cattle mutilation phenomenon, these are reports where animals, predominantly cattle, have been reported killed under very, very strange circumstances, drained of blood, organs removed, cuts having, if you like, or the cuts appear to be made by surgical instruments or laser-type devices. And in many cases, strange lights are reported seen, UFOs are reported seen, unmarked helicopters are reported seen, and this has resulted in various theories being put forward that this is the work of satanic cults or UFOs or some form of weird biological warfare operation being conducted by the military. Or other researchers have suggested a combination of all three theories. But at this stage, I think it's fair to say that nobody's really got the answer beyond the fact that, yes, something very strange is going on. But if we look at a few of the reports that the FBI have declassified, one which stands out in particular is dated August 1975. And this is from Floyd K. Haskell, who was the Colorado representative of the United States Senate. And he wrote to the FBI saying, for several months my office has been receiving reports of cattle mutilations throughout Colorado and other western states. At least 130 cases in Colorado alone have been reported to local officials and the CBI. The ranchers and rural residents of Colorado are concerned and frightened by these incidents. The bizarre mutilations are frightening in themselves. In virtually all the cases, the left ear, left eye, rectum and sex organ of each animal has been cut away and the blood drained from the carcass, but with no traces of blood left on the ground and no footprints. In Colorado's Morgan County area, there has also been reports that a helicopter was used by those who mutilated the carcasses of the cattle, and several persons have reported being chased by a similar helicopter. Go on to the next one, Matt. That's another example, as you can see, with the eye removed. And interestingly, as John was talking about earlier, with part of the flesh around the jawbone removed. And this is an interesting report from 1976, which sounds like something straight out of the X-Files, but it's actually a New Mexico State Police report, again declassified by the FBI. And it concerns a cow which was found on the ground on a ranch in New Mexico with strange markings around it, tripod markings, elevated radiation readings. I'll just quote you the report so you can see that I'm not exaggerating with regard to what it says. Investigations continued around the area and revealed that a suspected aircraft of some type had landed twice, leaving 3 pod marks positioned in a triangular shape. The diameter of each pod was 14 inches. Emanating from the 2 landings were smaller triangular-shaped tripods, 28 inches apart and 4 inches in diameter. Investigation at the scene showed that these small tripods had followed the cow for approximately 600 feet. Tracks of the cow showed where she had struggled and fallen. The small tripod tracks were all around the cow. Other evidence showed that grass around the tripods, as they followed the cow, had been scorched. Also, a yellow oily substance was located in 2 places under the small tripods. This substance was submitted to the state police lab. The lab was unable to detect the content of the substance. So again, here we've got cattle mutilated, scorched marks on the ground, strange tripod markings which had followed the cow, all prime evidence, if you like, of something otherworldly taking place, and right in the heart of New Mexico ranchland. And these things are still going on to this day. The FBI recently released a number of reports, again through sheriff's offices, that came through official channels in the mid-1990s. So these events are still going on to this day. Next one, please, Matt. That's a 1976 document, October 1976, and it's a 1-page memorandum forwarding to the FBI at Washington an article called The Mutilation Mystery, which appeared in the September 1976 issue of a magazine. And what's interesting is the bottom line refers to the fact that theories that these mutilations of cattle are only a forerunner for later mutilations of human beings. And this is something that's been rumoured, certainly not proven, but rumoured for a number of years, that there have been so-called human mutilations. Now, whether they have or they haven't, I can't confirm that, but I can confirm that the FBI did forward a copy of an article which specifically addressed this issue to FBI headquarters and specifically mentioned this in the covering memorandum, which is this one, which has now been declassified. The next one, Matt. That's one page of a 6-page report summarising a conference on cattle mutilations which was held in New Mexico in 1979, and the FBI sent agents along, and these different paragraphs here are summaries of various theories put forward by different people to try and explain the cattle mutilations. It references David Perkins, director of the Department of Research at LAPIS School, I think it is, in Colorado, who exhibited a map of the United States which contained hundreds of coloured pins identifying mutilation sites. He commented that he had been making a systematic collection of data since '75 and has never met a greater challenge. He said, "The only thing that makes sense about the mutilations is that they make no sense at all," which is probably a fair place to stop on that particular topic. And the next one, please, Matt. This is a strange report. This is from '67. In October 1967, a woman walked into the FBI office at Dallas, Texas, and related some fairly startling information to the special agents in charge there concerning information that she picked up on the UFO subject. And I think reading between the lines, this was, if you like, channeled information. But again, the FBI was interested enough to put together a 2-page report on this particular case, which references her alleged knowledge of an anti-missile missile which was fired at a UFO over Africa in 1962, a UFO detected 22,000 miles from Earth. 10 minutes? By radar about August the 6th, 1967, and a UFO was detected over Antarctica on August the 20th, 1967. And again, this report was forwarded to the Air Force for scrutiny. What the Air Force did with it, we don't know, but again, thanks to the Freedom of Information Act, we've possibly got an insight into an interesting little story that occurred in '67. And the next one, Matt. That's just the second page of it. And the next one. Okay. Again, one of the theories that's been put forward to explain UFOs is, are some UFOs some form of military technology? Well, this is one of 5 or 6 reports which exist in the FBI's files concerning so-called Nazi flying saucers. This particular report from 1967 is a summary of an interview that FBI agents in Miami, Florida, carried out with a guy who was, I think, with the Luftwaffe? Yeah, with the Luftwaffe, serving on the Russian front in the war, and who said that he saw some form of flying saucer device, presumably constructed by the Germans, which was undergoing some form of test flight. So again, I think we've got several things at work here. Although predominantly, I suppose I write about government cover-ups with regard to UFOs, and I suppose most people know that, I support the notion that some UFOs are extraterrestrial. I do passionately believe that, but, I don't rule out and actually believe that some UFOs are secret technology, just in the same way I also believe some UFOs are probably some form of poorly understood natural phenomena. It just happens to be the case that I focus most of my research on the one particular area. But certainly this particular FBI report does show that there are also other areas of research worth looking into. And, this again gives us an insight into what may have been going on in the mid-40s when the UFO controversy was just beginning. Next one, please, Matt. Okay, the next one as well, please. Okay, I'll just round it up with 3 more. I'm sure most of you have seen the Men in Black film, Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith, and you've all heard the rumours about the Men in Black. Well, the FBI, again, have had records on file dating back to at least the mid to late 1950s concerning so-called Men in Black experiences. This is a fairly heavily censored FBI report concerning the experiences of a guy, 2 guys, Gray Barker and Albert Bender, who were 2 people involved in the Men in Black controversy very early on. Bender was one of the, if not the earliest person to claim that he was visited by a so-called group of Men in Black, and Gray Barker then went and wrote it all up in a book called They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. And the FBI picked up on this because theories have been put forward that these guys had been impersonating FBI agents, which of course was a federal crime. So again, the FBI looked into this. And if you have the next one, Matt. That's a February 1959 documents from the FBI office in Chicago to J. Edgar Hoover, forwarding him a copy of Gray Barker's book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. So, again, Men in Black, it sounds like something from a Hollywood film, until we find out that the boss of the FBI in 1959 ordered a copy of Gray Barker's book on Men in Black to be forwarded to him with priority for his attention. What Hoover found out about the subject, we certainly don't know to this day. And now, one of the big questions, of course, is there a cover-up of UFO data on the part of the FBI? Personally, I don't think there is. I think the FBI have done a good job in releasing, I think, the vast majority of their files on the subject. There are indications that maybe certain people within the FBI knew more about the subject. If we talk about Philip Corso, as Michael was doing earlier, Corso said that he had several meetings with J. Edgar Hoover, and Hoover wanted to know what the truth was behind the Roswell crash. He'd apparently heard about it, but he hadn't got firm evidence as to what went on. And I think he entertained various theories that it might well have occurred, that it was a big public relations fiasco, or that it was just some form of modern myth, or it genuinely involved a crashed UFO. So, I think there are possibly other files, or there were other files within the FBI on UFOs, but I think the 4,000 or so pages they've now released do tend to indicate that they have released most of the stuff that they've got. And I think they have, as I say, done a good job in getting this information out. And I would agree, as Michael said, that if there are secrets to be kept beyond those held by the FBI, as I believe there are, then they're probably the domain of some form of Majestic 12 type organisation. But what I'd like to just close by, or say in closing, is that, I think for many people, who do watch the X-Files, there's a tendency to believe that, FBI agents going around the country investigating strange phenomena, it does sound like something out of science fiction, until you realise that the real FBI has been involved in, for example, cattle mutilations, Men in Black reports, radar reports, pilot encounters, contactee cases, you name it, they've been involved. So maybe in the words of the X-Files, the truth really is out there, but perhaps it's a little bit closer to home than we previously thought. Thanks a lot.